This is a Sigma DP1S. It's a compact camera featuring Sigma's infamous Foveon X3 sensor. I wanted to do a quick review of this camera because this camera and others like it have been getting a lot of attention recently, so I was curious to see if the hype was justified. Now, as I sat down to make my review and was just testing out all the functions and features again, the camera just died on me. It was working right before I started making this review, and then it suddenly died. Okay, so this is what the camera looks like when it's dead. The lens is fully extended. No power anymore. Doesn't matter if the battery is fully charged. The camera is completely unresponsive. And this, as far as I can tell, is a common problem with the Sigma DP1 and DP2, the early series of Foveon cameras. Now, this camera is from 2009. There's a lot of reason for electronics to fail over time. But the camera was working perfectly fine when I bought it. I did buy it from eBay, and I take very special care with all my equipment. I never drop cameras. I always keep them in protective pouches. Especially with compact cameras, I'm very careful about ingress of dust and other particles. So the camera just died. Now, it's worth noting that the camera died immediately after I tested out the flash. It's probably just a coincidence. Maybe the camera was going to die anyway. So I just found out from Sigma that they no longer repair this camera, at least in Canada. They ran out of parts 4 years ago. We're going to talk about the pros and the cons. We're still going to do a review even though the camera is broken. I mean, I have used it successfully for quite a few pictures, and I'll be sure to show you guys a bunch of sample photos from this camera as the review progresses. Before we jump in, I'd like to talk briefly about where this camera stands in relation to other Foveon compact cameras. Now, I have organized them all on one slide, and at the top you can see the equivalent full-frame focal length, which is how I recommend choosing a Foveon camera if you're dead set on buying one of them. Choose the equivalent focal length, or the equivalent field of view rather, that you're most familiar with, and it's on you to choose which generation of camera to go for. The first generation of cameras was from 2006 to 2011, and they're the DP1 and the DP2. The DP1, including the one I'm reviewing in this video, is a 28mm equivalent field of view. Uses a 1.7 times crop APS-C sensor. The DP2 series are 41mm equivalent field of view cameras, and as we go down, the models become newer. So the DP1S is newer than the DP1. Next up, we have the second generation, the Merrill series of compact cameras. I've heard great things about the DP3 Merrill in particular, but I have no experience with these cameras, so if you do, feel free to chime in with your thoughts. The most recent generation, the Quattro cameras, there are 4 of them, 14, 28, 45, and 75, so quite a spread of focal lengths. And these prices for the Quattro series, the prices in parentheses, the first number is the new price, because you can still buy them new from some retailers, and then the second price is just the latest used price that I was able to get from eBay. And all the other prices for the first and second generation cameras are the used prices from eBay. Now, prices for these cameras are constantly fluctuating. They go up and down just because there isn't a crazy volume of cameras being sold. But in any case, there have definitely been quality of life improvements as you go down the list. First of all, the first generation of cameras, the file sizes are 5 megapixels. Now, I do not want to get into a technical argument about how many true megapixels the Foveon sensor offers, because the Foveon sensor's claim to fame is that there are 3 photodiodes stacked on top of each other. Sigma deems it fit to multiply all megapixel counts by 3. Okay, so they actually claim that the DP1S, for example, has a 14 megapixel sensor. Really, the output is 5 megapixels. The second generation, you're going to get 15 megapixel files, and the third generation, 20 megapixels. Now, there's a lot of detail in these files, as we will discuss, but just know that going in. The one really good thing about this camera, okay, is this manual focus distance wheel, okay, right here. So you can see you can preset a manual focus distance from 30 centimeters all the way to 5 meters and then infinity. Okay, so this is actually a lot faster than the admittedly quite slow autofocus system on this camera. Now, the autofocus is okay, but it hunts a lot, and in low light, it's even slower. But if you set this manual focus and go into manual focus mode, well, it's like kind of the snap focus feature on the Ricoh GR series. If you know what you're doing, for example, for street photography, just set it to 2 meters and go. I've successfully even used this manual focus wheel to take action photos, which is not its intended use, and this is an extremely frustrating exercise. I'm a very patient person, however. I'm into meditation and all that stuff. Success rate was about 5 to 10%. If there's a will, there's a way. Look, the main headline for the Foveon cameras, why do they have a cult following? Why do people pay upwards of 150, 200 for a camera that's over 10 years old? It's for the Foveon colors. The Foveon sensor is different from the Bayer sensor, and it does produce a different kind of image. Hard to describe, but the images certainly feel like they have a lot of life to them, if that makes any sense, which makes these cameras very popular for landscape shooters. Now, I wouldn't use these cameras where color accuracy is important, okay, for example, in commercial or product work, but for stuff like landscapes, travel, I think will give you unique results. It's up to you to decide whether the price is worth it. Otherwise, the camera has very thoughtful controls. It was clearly designed by photographers. The buttons have a good feel to them. The wheel at the top here allows you to select from manual, shutter priority, aperture priority, program mode. So all the manual controls are there. Okay, in that sense, you can control aperture, shutter speed, ISO. So you're good to go. As long as you understand the exposure triangle, you can squeeze a lot of performance out of this camera. The camera shoots RAW files. Now, a lot of people recommend using Sigma's free SPP, Sigma Photo Pro software, to process the files. I have, however, just been using Lightroom, which uses Adobe Camera Raw, handles these files just fine. All in all, it's a very lightweight, comfortable camera. You can use it with one hand. It gets you stunning, unique results, provided you're patient enough to work around its quirks. It was released for $600, and even up until a few years ago, it had plummeted to something like 50, 75 bucks on the used market. Now, people are asking sometimes upwards of 200. You're getting a very old camera, 5 megapixel files. Everybody expects YouTubers to just be happy about every product, but I can't in good conscience recommend that a beginner photographer spend 200 bucks on a camera like this. The lens is also a slow lens, f4 at its fastest. Okay, the DP2 series actually features an f2.8 lens. The main thing I take issue with this camera is, so the ISO goes from 50 to 800, but Sigma didn't even give you the option to shoot 1600 and above. So that's a definite letdown. The LCD, which you cannot see right now because it's not functional, it's 2.5 inches, but the resolution is quite low at 230,000 pixels. There are only 9 autofocus points. The autofocus is fairly slow. It hunts in low light, and if you want to change the autofocus point, you have to go digging around in the menus. The flash, onboard flash, we should be thankful that it exists, but it's not that strong. However, if you do want to mount an external flash, there is a hot shoe available. Finally, this camera is not as pocketable as you might think, but even when fully retracted, it's still not going to fit in a jeans pocket, right? This is more of a coat pocket or jacket pocket kind of camera. It shoots a maximum of 3 FPS, and if you're shooting in RAW, which I recommend for everyone shooting these cameras, the RAW files take about 4 seconds to record to the camera. So you're not going to be using it for sports, action, wildlife, or anything really that requires fast response times, because once you press the shutter button, it takes a few seconds to store the file to the camera. The minimum focusing distance, as you can tell, is 30 centimeters, which honestly isn't great, because I think we're used to compact cameras that are able to get to within 10 centimeters of an object, a few inches, right? And 30 centimeters, well, it's a whole foot. So you're not going to do any kind of macro photography with this guy. The battery life is something that people complain about. It's rated at 250 shots, but I personally didn't find anything wrong with the battery. I was able to use this camera all day, can't complain. Why we shoot these Foveon cameras is to get that unique rendering, is to get those colors that just pop out and jump out at you. I was never a very artistic person, so it's very nice to just hand over responsibility of color science to this new sensor. So the colors are unique, they're vibrant, they add life to the images. The lens is sharp, even wide open at f4. I was able to get decently sharp results, and there was very, very little, if any, chromatic aberration. If there was any, it was easily removed with one click in Lightroom. It's a wide lens, around the 28 millimeter field of view, with very little distortion. The results I was able to get with this camera were okay for review purposes, but they wouldn't be something I put in my portfolio. I wish I had more time with this camera. I'm not sure if I would buy another one of these. I certainly can't recommend buying another one of these if they're just going to break on people. I guess I'd be open to using one of the Merrill cameras if I saw a good deal for one. So finally, guys, if you have used one of these cameras in the past, let us know in the comment section. And as always, thank you for watching and subscribe for more.